For further analysis, let's bring in Ben Aris. He's the editor-in-chief at BNE IntelliNews, and he joins me now live from Berlin. Ben, thank you very much for joining us. So I want to talk about Bakhmut here. Now, a rather surprising statement made by the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, in which he says that unless his nation wins a drawn-out battle in a key eastern city of Bakhmut, Russia could begin building international support for a deal that could require Ukraine to make unacceptable compromises. Now, certainly there are many ways to interpret his statement, and one of them could be perhaps that it is an acknowledgement by Ukraine that if Ukraine loses in Bakhmut, that would mean an end to this war and a victory for the Russians.
I think what Zelenskyy is scared of is the fatigue that could grow in the West with the war. If they're not making any progress at all, and it's a stalemate, and it is a stalemate at the moment, then support for the war will slowly evaporate. People will ask, where's the end to this? We've written a piece recently saying that the West doesn't seem to have a war goal, in so much as the goal so far is to make sure that Ukraine doesn't lose, but then not to win. They're giving defensive weapons. They've only just started to give some offensive weapons in the form of tanks. Another 2 arrived from Portugal. There's now about 30 Leopard tanks in Ukraine. But that's not enough to turn the tide of the war. Zelenskyy himself says, we need 300 or 400. And those have been promised, but they're going to take a year to come. So if this stalemate then locks in and carries on all summer, then the support, people will start saying, look, this is just senseless killing of hundreds of thousands of people. We should bring it to an end. And so Bakhmut has become very symbolic in that sense. For the Russians too, they also need to see progress. Putin, for his own domestic political purposes, needs some victories to report. And neither side is getting them. And so with both sides expected to launch a spring offensive, fairly soon, it could be decisive, but at the moment everything's still up in the air.
But Ben, do you find this statement surprising or not, or do you think that this was very timely, in line with what's happening on the ground in the battlefield in Bakhmut?
Yeah, I think it's timely. This problem of, is it an unwinnable war has been in the air now for quite a while, and there's been talk, several people, the Russians have talked about possible peace talks, although they have unacceptable starting conditions. Xi Jinping was just in Moscow, and he floated a 12-point peace plan on the anniversary of the start of the war. And so I think China would also be interested in seeing it end. And of course, Europe, the cost to Europe of the poly crisis that's developed around this war, with energy, with inflation, the cost of living, is also extremely painful, and they would like to see it end too. But as I say, because of what's at stake here, the security of Europe as a whole, they don't want to see Russia victorious. And the problem is if you stop it now, only way of doing that is to make significant territorial concessions and let Putin basically keep what he's got. And the Ukrainians themselves are adamant that that's not going to happen, that they want all of their territory back, including the Crimea. They want to go back to the 1991 borders. And so we've got, again, a diplomatic standoff where neither side is prepared to compromise. And peace talks, although they've been talked about, seem a long way away before either side is prepared to sit at the table and start the discussion.
But certainly, Ben, many surprising developments are taking place in the region. For example, the Russian military has started drills with the YARS, mobile nuclear intercontinental ballistic missiles system. And then you have President Putin basically saying that Moscow had struck a deal with Belarus to position tactical nuclear weapons on its territory. What is your navigation through all these developments? Are we really moving towards a nuclear confrontation, or is this just a gesture from the Russians?
Well, firstly, I think it's important to say that this thing about putting tactical nuclear weapons into Belarus is posturing. What they've done is they've built a secure warehouse, and they specifically said this is going to be storage. It's not going to be an active battery, which would point missiles at the heart of Europe. And it follows on the justification from the Kremlin side is a response to the UK announcement that it was going to send depleted uranium tank rounds to Ukraine. which are extremely good at piercing armor. Russians' tanks are already weak compared to things like the Leopard, and these rounds would make them even more effective. So there's that. But on the other hand, I mean, it's part of what I was talking about before. Putin trying to put pressure on the West, trying to keep people, unstable and scared of an eventual escalation to nuclear war that will help his program of trying to get the West to push Ukraine into doing negotiated deal. Because at the end of the day, we are seeing a steady, slow escalation. This thing with Belarus was about the minimum Putin could do in terms of nuclear weapons. I mean, Russia already in 2016 put active Iskander nuclear-capable missiles into Kaliningrad, and those are closer to Europe, and those really are pointing at Europe. But as I say, he wants to destabilize, he wants to keep the pressure on, he wants to get people tired of this. And again, we've seen in the last week some 30 Leopard tanks. Those are offensive weapons arrive in Belarus, in Ukraine. And that is also an escalation because it's the first time that West has sent overtly offensive weapons to join the fight. Unfortunately, not in the numbers that will make a big difference. But again, it's another step down the path, and that was followed by the nuclear weapons. And now we've got the missile exercises going on, which is more of the same. And, it's slowly, step by step, inch by inch, getting worse. And people are going to get increasingly nervous as this goes on. And I think that's Putin's calculation. He wants to bring them to the point where people in the West are just like, we've had enough. This is getting too scary. We need to stop it now.
Fascinating insights into the topic. Ben Aris, thank you very much for talking to us here on TRT World. Really appreciate your taking out the time.